So let's talk about this keyword called finally. This is an important keyword, and what it does, in the shortest, simplest way of saying it, it basically runs whatever's in that block, and whatever case, either the try is finished correctly or the try throws an exception and we catch it, it will, at the end of all of that, either way, it will hit the finally. So let's see how that would work. So after the try and the catches, we would put a finally. This is kind of like a if, else ifs, and then an else. This would be the else. But the big difference is all of this could still run, unlike an if statement. An if statement, one of them is correct, none of the other ones will run. In this case, the try will execute, and if it's finished, then it would go finally. Or the try will execute, and if ever in the middle, let's say at the scanner, there's an exception that's been thrown, it will catch it, do one of the catches, and then again do the finally at the end. So let's see how that would work. So I'm going to put finally here, and we're just going to run it. So the only thing we did was add the block called finally and just put a finally text. So if we got a wrong file, we get the catch message, and then the finally will happen, and then we're back to the loop. If we enter a correct file, we still get to finally, either case. So something that's confusing people is like, well, why do we have finally when we could just outside of it, after the whole try catch block, we could just outside put outside. Something like this. And then if we run this, you'll notice if we got something wrong, we're going to have both of them, finally and outside, finally and outside. And if we got something correct, we would still have finally. And why do I not have outside? Must be because I'm breaking it. Actually, we came to the answer to this before even doing it. So the point about finally, it will always execute. And in this case, because we break my while true, this outside part does not get hit, right? You look at the code for 1 second. This is our while true, this line over here. And then the break, it happens at line 28. So when the break happens, this part is not being done, but this part is always going to be done. Let's do a little, let's do another sample. It'll be a bit easier. So on basics, let's create a new class. Let's call it finally. And this one, we're going to make it a bit shorter so it's a bit more clear. That was a good example. I didn't even notice that we were doing that. So inside main, we're going to call a method. Let's say, let's go ahead and create one. Public static void something. And progressively, we'll make it more complex. Okay. Inside this method, we're going to call something. Okay. And we're going to add a lot of these system.out before call. And over here, we got after call. Over here, we're going to do, well, we're going to do our try catch block. And let's say, I don't know, inside try. We don't need to have a catch. We could just have a try finally block too, if we wanted to. Inside finally. Outside finally. And that seems to be good. We're not going to put one before try. It's always going to get executed. So we already have this one. So now if we run this, you'll notice we get before call, inside try. Well, there we go. Before call, inside try, inside finally, and then outside finally, and then after the call. One thing at a time. Now, what normally ends a method would be something like a return. So if I put a return, let's say I'm going to put it first after the inside try, you'll notice already I'm getting an error saying this code is never going to be reached. Why? Because this ends my method. So anything afterwards will not run. But notice here, the finally doesn't give me that error. So let's remove this. If I run this finally, it will still execute even though we have a return called. Ends the method, right? You look, we still get it finally. Okay. Well, you're like, well, this doesn't make sense. What kind of code is this? Well, what if we weren't just returning void, we were returning an integer. And over here, we say return 5 as an example. And again, if we run it, the finally will always get called even though it's returning 5. Let's make it a bit more interesting. Well, I don't need to keep going. I'm just telling you, it's always going to be executed, whatever the case being. Sometimes even with different threads, I don't remember the exact rule sets, but finally is there to be executed. Whatever the case, whatever happens, finally will be executed. As you saw over here with breaking my loops, it still executes the finally. Over here, with a method being returned, it still has to finish the finally. Now, the last thing we want to talk about is why do we even want to bother using finally? Well, why would we need something that would always execute? Well, mostly this is done to close off any trails, anything we open, done, or whatever we need to do before this method or this section or this statements of code need to move on. Before that, we make everything go to the way we need it to be before moving on. Let's say a real type of example in the world would be like, let's say you're sharing a computer, but you're sharing with like 20 other people, let's say, or 100 people, doesn't matter. Or, well, yeah, computer is good enough. You go inside and you start searching everything. You open up 20 tabs, you open up 3 programs, they're running in the background, etc. And then it's the turn of the next student to come and use the computer. He comes in and the computer is super slow because all your stuff is open. You might be logged in as a different user or whatever the case may be. In that case, the last part of your job being on the computer is to make sure that you close off everything, make sure the computer is ready for the next user. This is kind of the same thing. You might not use it currently, but we're going to try and implement it somewhere along the way in the future. I'll see you guys in the next video.